Hello again, everybody. I'm Daniel, the Cross-Cultural Nerd, with another video for you today. Come to the realization the last several months that I've been making content that was almost all nerd and far less cross-cultural. And due to being busy with work, parenthood, and whatnot, it's been a while since I've done a video that's really gotten into the nitty-gritty of intercultural stuff. And yeah, it's time to fix that. This here is a video I've had in the works since November and just never got around to filming. But yeah, time to fix that. Today we're talking about something that plagues every person who spends any appreciable amount of time abroad: culture shock. If you have plans to study, work, or otherwise make a life abroad in the near future for more than a few weeks, this video is for you. And as this is springtime, maybe some of you are planning to do so this coming fall. So you may find this useful. I also hope that those watching who have more extensive experience abroad can appreciate this well. If you have anything extra to add, please put comments below. I'll address that again later. Anyway, let's get started. First off, what is culture shock? Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines culture shock as a sense of confusion and uncertainty, sometimes with feelings of anxiety that may affect people exposed to an alien culture or environment without adequate preparation. This is not restricted to merely going to a drastically different foreign country. Culture shock can also happen when you move to a different part of the same country, or even going from a small town to a large city, or vice versa. For Americans, you might think of a New Yorker moving to Kentucky and having to get used to random folks on the street greeting them in passing. Or perhaps a Kentuckian going to New York and being called rude when they call somebody sir or ma'am. Culture shock almost never happens instantly. It usually happens in stages, and each stage can last from weeks to years, depending on the person, how well they adjust, and how similar the host culture is to their native culture. It was Canadian-American anthropologist Kalervo Oberg who first suggested that typically there are 4 stages to this cultural adjustment: the honeymoon stage, the negotiation stage, the adjustment stage, and the acceptance stage. Rachel Irwin at the University of Oxford also says that the progression of culture shock isn't always linear, and one might experience multiple stages at one time, or they may go back to an earlier stage, but for the purpose of this video, we'll discuss Oberg's 4 stages in order. The honeymoon stage is the initial high you get from being in a new place. Everything is so new and exciting. You're meeting interesting people, you're seeing places you'd only heard of in books and videos, and that new food you just had for dinner is the most delicious thing you've had in years. Usually, this stage lasts from a few weeks to a few months. Most people on cross-cultural trips shorter than a semester don't leave this stage, simply because they're not in the target culture for enough time, a week to a month in most cases. There are, of course, exceptions, usually if something traumatic occurs, or if the traveler is just especially pessimistic. But if your friend comes back from a trip with no negative things to say, they probably never got out of the honeymoon phase. The next stage is the negotiation phase, although some may better appreciate its alternate name of the frustration phase. Usually after a couple of months, the metaphorical honeymoon is over and you start really noticing things that are different from what you're used to the point of annoying or even angering you. This can be caused by almost anything. Language barriers, different cultural practices, different laws and policies, different attitudes, hygiene, traffic, cuisine, and more. Oh, that's interesting gives way to, oh, this sucks. You start really missing home much more than before. You're annoyed at yourself for not being able to communicate well enough. It's tougher to celebrate your own culture's major holidays. You start tiring of that local food you used to enjoy so much. You start getting angry or depressed over it all, and you might find your emotional and mental health affected. You might withdraw from other people for a while. Your physical health may even be affected between how mental health affects physical health to how your body adjusts to the environment and the food. This is the most difficult part of adjusting to a culture. This is where the shock of culture shock comes from. How long it lasts, again, depends on the person and the similarity between their own culture and the new one, but it's usually a few months. The most optimistic and adaptable may have it last just a few weeks. At worst, it can last for years, and a few might never get out of this stage. One case of those latter few I heard years ago was a teacher who'd been in China for a few years, but was clearly just in it for the money. He had little good to say about his life there and would only eat Western food when he could help it. Outside of China, I once heard of an English missionary couple in Eastern Africa, and the husband had adjusted well enough, but the wife had her residence there furnished as close to an English style as possible and rarely went out when she could help it. Now, I like to think I had an easier adjustment to China than most have. I majored in anthropology. One of my minors was in East Asian Studies, and my second cross-cultural trip through my alma mater was a month-long trip to China, mostly here in Henan. So I knew a lot of what to expect, but studying, reading books, watching videos, befriending international students, and even traveling somewhere first can only prepare you so much for actually living in a different place for several months or more. While my frustration period was shorter than most, it hit me the hardest my first Christmas in China back in 2012. Even though China doesn't have off work and school for Christmas, I had plans with friends after classes, and the foreign teachers at the university where I studied were having a massive Christmas party for all the foreigners at the school, faculty and students alike. But my Chinese language teacher gave my class a huge study guide for the final exam. It was assigned December 24th and due December 26th. Most of my plans were out the window, and I hit what was probably my lowest point emotionally in my time as an international student. I was able to make the Christmas party, but only because I did nothing but work on that dang study guide the rest of the time I wasn't in class. And it took me some time to get over, because the experience of nearly not having Christmas at all was still a lot to take in. At my alma mater, a Bosnian Serb friend of mine once said that her own denomination, Eastern Orthodoxy, being significantly rarer in the U.S., contributed to her own frustration her first year. Hindu and Muslim friends from Nepal and Pakistan expressed similar thoughts regarding the lack of Hindu temples and mosques. In my last term there, as part of my ethnographic writing class, I interviewed several students from China on their experiences studying in the States. Difficulties they mentioned as contributing to their own cultural frustration periods were the food being too sweet or too oily, some people being fake, the need to have a car outside of the biggest cities, and America's major emphasis on individualism. Again, one's negotiation or frustration period can be started or exacerbated by any number of factors. It depends on the person. The third stage is the adjustment stage. This is when you know more what to expect from the culture where you reside. You still enjoy the parts that you like, but instead of staying angry at the parts that you don't like, you come up with ways to deal with them. You start seeing the culture in light of its own merits through how the people there think and do things rather than through how it differs from how you do things. You can get around better, probably understand enough of the language to get around on the street, and at this point likely have several local friends that you can trust and lean on in difficult times. Stuff starts making sense, and the place starts feeling more like home. My adjustment stage was helped by several factors. I knew more about the culture. My teachers were very supportive. I had Chinese friends, and later a girlfriend who is now my wife, who made me feel more at home. I had many friends among my fellow international students who supported each other as friends who were all in it together, as well as other international students and foreign teachers who had been in China longer than I had and could give me advice on how to adjust. Back in my alma mater, my Bosnian Serb friend, who had no Orthodox church nearby at the time in which to worship, learned to appreciate the various Protestant styles of worship in the area, since that at least was still Christian. My Chinese friends, who found the lack of a car a difficulty, befriended people with cars and used the local bus routes when they were available. And sometimes you just need to get creative with how you handle things. But adjustment will come sooner or later in the vast majority of cases. Finally, we have what could alternately be called the acceptance stage, recovery stage, adaptation stage, or bicultural stage. This comes when you've been in a place long enough and have adjusted well enough that you can participate fully in the host culture. It's more or less home for you now. If and when you eventually return to your previous home, there will be things that you miss from the host culture. And you may even go through a bit of the culture shock process again as you readjust to your old home. Getting from the honeymoon stage to this point will most likely take at least a year or a couple of years for all save the most adaptable people. Now, if you've been in a country 18 months or so and you're not quite feeling at home yet, don't worry, you're not alone. When you get to this stage, you'll have found a way to fully resolve your problems from the negotiation period, And for those issues that you hate and can't resolve even after all this time, just recognize that this is how things are often done, and then grit your teeth and bear it, like all the short notice stuff for me here in China. There are things you can do to accelerate the process of adjusting to the host culture. Be open-minded and learn why things are the way they are. Make local friends and focus on the positives, like the parts of the culture that you like, your favorite local foods, and the people you've met who help make your life a little bit better. One important thing to remember is that for this final stage, it isn't necessary for you to master the culture or the language. You don't completely abandon your native culture for this new culture. I'm still very much Daniel from Kentucky. My Chinese isn't native level, I'm just HSK level 5, and I still make the occasional cultural faux pas. And I dearly wish I can take my wife and daughter and even my mother-in-law to the States long-term sooner rather than later. But after being in China for over 11 years now, I can generally function well and get around. I can have decently long conversations as long as I don't need vocabulary that's too traditional or technical. When new foreigners arrive in Luoyang, nowadays I'm often one of the people that other foreigners will direct them to for advice. I'm okay going several weeks without Western food. I've come to enjoy the local festivals as well as my own. Spring Festival's probably my third favorite holiday now. Sure, there are people who are still better adjusted than I am, and there are still ways I can improve, but after this much time, I've come to accept Henan, China, and Luoyang in particular as my second home. And when I eventually leave, there are many things about Henan that I will miss. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the comments section below. I'll get back to you. Don't forget, follow me on Facebook, X, Mastodon, Instagram, and co-host. I'm Daniel, the Cross-Cultural Nerd. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.